Welcome to Chapter 3 of our GameMaker project where we're making an action RPG. So, we left off with all of our player-based weaponry and status effects and all that other cool stuff. So we have a player, we have a little bit of a UI, we have an inventory, we have weapons, and eventually we can run out of health. So we want to start adding enemies. And let's start with this Blob character. We're going to import them as a sprite sheet. Well, not as a sprite sheet, but as individual sprites, not in a sprite sheet. So we're going to start. We're going to need a new folder for enemies. So let's right-click and create a new group called enemies. And then within that group, I'm going to create another one. Create group called Orange Blob. I think it's more of a yellow blob, but you know. Orange Blob. So let's start with the idle sprite. So we're going to create a new sprite. We should, while we're here, set the correct frames per second, and I think 8 tends to work for this. So we're going to call this SPR underscore oblob, if I can spell that correct, underscore idle, and then import. And we are going to want to go to wherever we keep our sprites. So we're going to go to our enemies and our orange blob. And I'm going to use the larger ones and just scale them down. So I want to load in the idle sprites, which are these ones right here. But I generally like to try to load them in the correct order. I'm not sure if that really matters too much. Haven't really done a whole bunch of experimenting. It seems to be smart enough not to. So if you just single left click on the last frame, hold down shift, and then select, while holding down shift, single left click on the first one, it selects them in the proper order. And then here we go. We've got an idle animation. I am going to resize it. It is quite large. This is very huge. I want to resize it so that the width is 48. And I am going to use the linear interpolation and then hit apply. That looks very pixelated, but bear in mind, we are actually considered to be quite zoomed in here. In-game, the blob's going to look like that, because that's going to be how big it is. So the only other thing that I want to take care of is setting up the collision mask. So currently, it is defaulting to rectangle, which is something we don't really want. So let's switch it to an ellipse. I don't really like precise because then the eyebrows are part of the hitbox, which seems kind of silly. And then I could even maybe make this a manual hitbox and bring in some of the settings a little bit so that it's not as, I guess the correct term is not as aggressive. And then there we go. So we'll go with those settings. And we're going to try to use these same ones for each monster. As far as the orientation goes, I'm going to do what I did for the player and make the bottom center the point of the origin point. And yeah, so this is pretty good. I'm going to quickly use the snipping tool to screenshot my settings so that I can remember them. And then I'm going to create some of the other sprites. So I'm going to right click on Orange Blobs folder. We're going to create another sprite. And we're going to call this SPR underscore oblob underscore attack. And this will be the attack frames. So we're going to do the import process the same way. Single left click here, hold down shift, single left click here, and then open. And you can see that these opened in the correct order. Setting this to 8 frames per second like before. Setting the width to 48. Using linear interpolation. That just has to do with how it detects the pixels when it's shrinking this image. How it decides to do like the new pixels and stuff. Collision mask. We want to set this to manual, ellipse, and I'm going to use the same settings from before. And I'm going to recenter the origin down to the bottom center. And so this sprite is done. And one more. So we're going to add SPR underscore oblob underscore hurt. And this will be the hit animation. So when it gets hit, this will be the animation we use. So import and these 2 frames. And we are going to scale it so that the width is 48 using linear interpolation. And set the origin to bottom center. Set the collision mask. So we want an ellipse that is manual. Now recalculating, no, that one's the same. So this should be fine. So yeah, I have to recalculate this because the height is slightly different. So I need to say 3, and then I'm going to move this down 4. Because technically that's the same size. It's just this sprite's a little bit taller due to the little like tier type things. So like the hitbox goes up to the top of the eyes, the eyebrows-ish. And if we look at the hitbox here, that's kind of similar to these. Okay, so we've got our blob. And now we want to start creating the setup for the enemies. So I'm going to create a new object folder. And I'm going to call this enemies. And I'm going to start with the parent. So we're going to create a new object. And this will be called obj underscore enemy underscore parent. This is going to be where most of our code is, because this is going to kind of be the inheritable parent for all of the enemies that we create. And then we just kind of program the unique attacking behaviors for each enemy. And then we're going to create object orange blob. And I'm going to give it its sprite. Using the idle sprite. Now, a thought is we might want to just set this collision mask to always continue using the idle one. Now, they should be the same, but I don't want to run the risk of when it swaps frames, it having a slightly different hitbox. And then when it does that, it could potentially trap the player in a part of the hitbox that wasn't there, but all of a sudden now is there. So we might need to revisit that if our hitboxes are truly that atrocious. And then as far as parent goes, we want to make this the child of the object enemy parent. And that will get us started for using the blob. So we need to start tweaking a few things. So this blob doesn't have 4-way animations like our player does. So I want to start tweaking something in the animation script to facilitate handling this and handling this kind of gracefully. So right here, when we actually change the sprites, this is going to pose a problem because I'm trying to index an array based on the direction. The direction is going to be from 0 to 3. But what if we don't have 4 different sprites? So that's what I'm going to address here. So we're going to take each of these if cases and then actually kind of space out some conditions here. So if array length of idle animations is equal to 4, then do what we were doing. Else, if array length idle animations is equal to 1, then just manually reference index 0. Oh, I'm missing a parenthesis here. That way, if there's only one thing specified in that list, then it will be smart enough to just only access the first. And if there's any other number, then just return. Get out of this before we crash. I'm hitting return on that. There's not much else. Like, I don't really want to save the state if I don't actually have that state. And I don't think that that's going to pose a problem, but either way, I'm just going to hit return on that. So this is the kind of the idea that I want to apply to each of these now. So for walk animations, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to, these are all now referencing walk animation. For attack, I'm going to do the same thing. And this change is going to make a lot of things easier down the road. So while this seems like a little excessive, this is actually going to make our animations a lot easier to set up in the future, because we're not going to need to worry if we only have 1 versus 4. So just a lot of copying and paste. Fortunately, not too terribly hard to do. Okay, that's the only change we need to make to this, is this update. I'll make this a little bit bigger if you wanted to, like, screenshot this. It's about as much as I can fit. So that was the only change, was the changes for each of these different states. So when we're happy with that, we can start going to the enemy parents, and we can really start beginning the process of, I just want to get it to chase the player. In this first video, that's all I care about. We're going to come and visit this and make this more complex later. But right now, I just want to get it to chase the player. So I'd be happy if I can do that. So let's start with adding a create step. And we're going to kind of redo some of what player has here. So I'm actually going to steal some of this from player. This is probably the biggest overlap it has with player. So I'm just going to take all of these, cut that, close player, go back to here, and paste it in. So my impassable objects, same as the player. Now for animations, we don't have 4 animations. So we're going to just leave these blank at the moment. I could specify the blobs, but I'm actually going to have the blob handle that. And we could probably make a note here. I don't think there's a way I can make this mandatory for it to exist in children. I mean, it'll crash, so that's a thing. Then we need this for getting hit, so this will be useful down the road. Is a array to remember which weapons hit us. Or a list, I guess is the correct term. So that we don't accidentally double hit. And then we'll remember its starting location. So just a variable here, start x equals x, start y equals y. That'll be used when we're actually like chasing after the player and the player runs away too far. We'll remember where to go back to. And then we'll throw in a debugging variable. I'm going to say debug equals true. So that's our create step. Now, because we did need to define these animations, we do need to override this in the child. Normally, the child should inherit this. Let's just hit play to get this to process. There we go. So you can see in gray, and it's even got this icon. This indicates that it's inheriting this method from the parent. So because it's a child, it's gaining this method. Now, we want to override this because I need to define animations unique to the blob. So we're going to say add event, and we're going to add a create event. So define animations. The way that we trigger the original one is called a keyword events underscore inherited. And that will cause all of this to happen. So it will run all of your parents' create step. And then we want to define our animations. So these will replace these blank arrays with the blobs. So the idle animation is SPR underscore oblob idle. The walk animation is actually the same animation. The attack animation is SPR oblob attack. And the hurt animation is SPR oblob hurt. It doesn't have a slain animation. We'll just make it disappear into a puff of smoke. So this will then set up the stuff that the blob needs to function, at least, animation-wise. Okay. Now if we return back to the parent, we're going to actually need a quick, since we created this array, we do need a quick insertion of the cleanup step. And this is just to delete the list. So this will just be ds list destroy already hits. So we'll just take care of that so we don't leak memory. Now, we're going to probably need to start creating our massive amounts of variables here. And this is going to get pretty big. So, because we need to basically recreate and expand on what the player has. So, let's start creating some instance variables. Move underscore max, speed of 3. Move underscore acceleration. And 1.5, so it's a little bit slower than the player. Move underscore friction. 1 is fine, the same as the player. Move underscore direction. 0. move underscore magnitude 0. Now I'm going to add a new one called move underscore knockback underscore x and move underscore knockback y. We're going to use those when we start being able to attack the blob in our second video. So we're going to need those in a little bit. Now we need all the animation related things. So we need anim state. That is actually an integer. Then we need anim direction, also an integer. Anim locked, a boolean. Attack enabled, also a boolean. I kind of included in the animations just because it triggers very similarly with that. And then a few other ones. So let's call this stats underscore slain. And that is a boolean, and it is currently not slain. Stat HP. So this is how many hit points it's going to have. We'll set it to 40. Of course, we can change this if we wanted to. A few more stat-related things here. Stunned is a real number because this is the time left of how much stun it would have. The hurt is how much time is left for the hurt animation to play. And then we're going to get to some of the AI related stuff. So I'll just call this AI underscore. Target X. This is where it wants to go for movement. AI underscore target Y, where it wants to go also for its movement. And then one more. AI underscore aggro radius. And this is how far away it will take for the player to anger the creature. And then we'll do AI underscore super aggro. And this is a boolean. Super aggro is what I call when you hit a monster and you want it to chase the player. So the idea is that if the player shoots an arrow at a blob and hits it from across the screen, that the blob shouldn't stand there like a fool. The blob is going to go chase after the thing that just hit it. So even if the player's outside of its normal range that it would chase the player, this will this will get set to true whenever the player deals damage to this creature, and then it will chase you. So I know that's a lot of variables, but we're setting up an AI creature that can move, and unfortunately I kind of used my own move system instead of GameMaker's. Well, it's got animations, it's got some stats, and it's got some AI decision making. Okay, so now let's put this to use. Let's start setting up being able to just simply chase after the player. So we need a begin step. The begin step is going to be used to figure out what it wants to do. So this is typically going to be deciding based some movement stuff. So only chase if a player exists. And I add this protection just to be on the safe side. So if global.manager.data player is not equal to no one. So as long as there is a defined player variable, get the player and distance to the player. So var player equals global.manager.dataPlayer. And I just call it player just because this is quicker than typing that giant string out. Var player distance. And that's going to equal point distance of my x and y to player.x and player.y. I mean, we could get the angle too, but I don't think we need the angle, and that would just be an unneeded computation. So the first thing that we want to do is basically chase the player. So the first thing it wants to do is if the player distance is less than or equal to its aggro radius, or if it's been super aggroed. So this is chase the player. The condition player is within aggro range or is super aggroed. So all we want to do is set the desired movement target to the player's location. So we would say target x equals player.x and target y equals player.y. Then we have the catch-all else case. So this is going to happen if the player is not within my chase range. So if there's nothing else to do, we just want to return to our spot. So we'll say target x equals start x and targets, oops, these are called AI target, and then AI target y is equal to start y. So if the player is too far away, we want to just return back to my starting point. And so we need to update these real fast. It should have said AI. Okay, so we've decided where we want to go. Now let's actually go there. I know it's a deep thought. So we're going to add another event. We're going to add the step event. And this is where we set our depth and perform movement and knockback movement. So the first thing, set the depth, and that is depth equals -y. Then do these things if alive. So if stats or stat slain is false. So if this creature is alive, we want to move. So move if not stunned. So if stat stunned is less than or equal to 0, then we are going to trigger, we created that movement to method where we do AI target X minus my current X position and target Y minus Y. So the idea is that the amount of movement that the creature is going to do is we kind of like subtract the desired position from my current position. So this could be like -100 or something crazy like that. But the movement vector, when we do all of this, we end up normalizing the vector right here. And so even if we put it, even if it wants to travel 300 units, it gets normalized here. So we're fine. We don't actually, this actually isn't going to screw us up if there's kind of strange vectors. So we should be in good shape there. So if we're not stunned, move. And that's really all we need. We will have a few other things that we'll add here as we start dealing with combat. So this should, in theory, chase the player. So let's go put a blob into our world. So we'll go and put on the instances layer, we're going to put an orange blob somewhere. Hope we don't crash. Here we go. Oh, clean up line 4. Oh, not the player. Too many parentheses. Wow. That was disappointing. Okay, so here is our game. We've got the blobs just hanging out there, and when we get close to them, they chase us. Now, they kind of bounce back and forth because they're trying to get to our location, but we will eventually address that. And if we get far enough away from it, there we go. When we get far enough away from it, it wants to return back to its start location. And so it'll return back to its start location. Now, we will fix this jitter. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. As we start to add like attacking and such, we will deal with cases where it might be kind of like less than a whole number. Or less than 1, I guess is that case. Okay, so the blob chases us. I do want to add one more thing, just kind of for a style element, because I really think this will be kind of neat and useful. And so I'm going to go to the draw step. And this is for debug purposes. Show aggro radius. And we'll add to this as we go. So if debug is true, then we want to draw a yellow circle to indicate the enemy's aggro radius. So draw set color, C yellow, and then draw the circle. Draw underscore circle at the monster's X and Y. Size is aggro radius, AI aggro radius, and then true makes it just a wireframe. And then clean up, reset the color. So draw set color back to white, and make sure we still draw the sprite. So to do that, we just say draw self. That reminds it to draw the sprite. All right. So now if we hit play, what this allows us to do is this lets us, like when we're developing our game, we can turn on these little aggro circles so we get an idea of where the monster is going to start chasing us from, so that we can really play test and bug shoot, troubleshoot, debug, and we can make sure that these things are fixable. And so I think that's a pretty good stopping point. So we've still got some work to do. The blobs jitter, but we'll clean that up as we start programming the knockback behaviors and whatnot. So thanks for watching. In the next video, we're going to begin to implement being able to attack these blobs and then get them to kind of slide around when they get hit.